I believe we are live.
Okay, sweet. All right, well, welcome everyone to the this year's first meeting of the Education Economic Development Subcommittee. I want to welcome back our great subcommittee vice chair, Jared Solomon. I also want to welcome Stephanie Smith, who has joined the subcommittee this year. She is actually covering the full committee at an ECM hearing. She will join us when she is out. Again, we have our great committee counsel, Michelle Lambert, with us again this year, and we have a whole slew of excellent analysts. So to get that started, we have someone who's been with us for a long time, Andrew Gray, who's going to start with Canal Place. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should be seeing the Canal Place Preservation Development Authority, or Canal Place analysis. The Canal Place administers the program for the passages of the Western Potomac Heritage Area, formerly Canal Place Heritage Area. This is a 1.67 square miles area in Western Maryland. There's also over 1,000 acres in Cumberland, a smaller area in the historic core of Frostburg. Moving to the operating budget summary here, you'll see that the budget only increases by around $3,921 between fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. In terms of agency spending, majority of the spending is for contracts. Then there's also, that's to maintain the structures, the various properties that they have out in Western Maryland, Cumberland. And there's also personnel for 3 regular positions in the agency. And then there are fuel and utilities, around 10% of their overall costs. In terms of the proposed budget, as noted, it goes up by around $3,921. Some of the components of that increase include the reclassification for administrative officer for about $5,000. There's a $9,000 decrease for employee and retiree health insurance. In terms of other changes, just focus really briefly on the physical plant. Fuel and utilities increased by around $5,000, and there's an increase around $4,000 for supplies and materials. The big changes are buried in that final item of contracts. There's a $16,000 increase for janitorial services, and then around a $19,000 or so decrease for the Department of Information Technology Services costs. That actually required a deficiency last year in order to be able to, or actually the fiscal 22, in order to be able to provide for the sufficient funding for that purpose. The agency was actually over budgeted for that purpose, and therefore the general funds helped them out. In terms of personnel data, you'll see there are 3 positions in the agency, no changes. The administrative aide position was vacated in August 21, but has been filled as of January 22. In terms of the issues, the first issue here concerns Canal Place's future and how it remains a little bit unclear. It's been studied multiple times in recent years in terms of the Canal Place's kind of situation within the state apparatus. And all of those reviews have not necessarily come up with a conclusive idea about where to go with Canal Place. The most recent ideas were explored in chapters 618 and 619 of 2020. The information was provided in terms of the surveying the property. However, there was no completion in terms of an actual plan for Canal Place. The most recent idea has been brought up by a recommendation to actually fold Canal Place into the Department of Natural Resources. And this comes along with the idea that Canal Place is working on the river park at Canal Place. It's a large recreation project. Will be changing Potomac River to provide for actually whitewater recreational activities, and also provide for trails and various other recreation activities along Potomac River, and that would connect with Canal Place's operations in downtown Cumberland. So the idea is that the recreation opportunities would potentially allow for Canal Place to then be incorporated into the Department of Natural Resources. However, there's not as much information about this, so therefore the Department of Legislative Services recommends that Canal Place discuss the status of that proposed merger. Issue number 2 concerns revenues for Canal Place. There were some concerns last year in terms of leasing. During the pandemic, there were some leases that were lost, and Western Maryland Scenic Railroad actually moved out for a time. Therefore, there were some concerns about Canal Place's ongoing special fund revenues in order to support its operations. Now that Western Maryland Scenic Railroad has returned to Canal Place, however, the $3 per rider fee has been discontinued. And therefore, DLS recommends that Canal Place comment on the stability of its revenue sources and whether it's sufficient to support the fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 special fund appropriations. Issue 3 or actually it's issue 3 is about visitors and events. So visitors declined substantially during the pandemic in 2020 and then in 2021 as well for the calendar year. And you'll see school day participants, visitors to the National Park Service Canal Museum and Canal Boat, and to visitors to the Visitor Center all went down to 0. So that's basically due to the fact that those facilities were closed. So there are expectations for visitors to return moving forward into the fiscal or to calendar 22 and 23 estimates. Then in terms of events, you see a trend here of the total contract event revenue declining substantially since fiscal 2016. This is partially related to the idea that there's an event planner that was shared with the city of Cumberland is no longer being funded, and those events are not being provided for. But then moving forward, there is some expectation of additional nonprofit contracted events funding coming in, and then also some Canal Place sponsored events as well. In terms of the recommended actions, so concur with the governor's allowance. Then just a brief update on the river park at Canal Place, that whitewater and other feature park that we talked about a little bit earlier. There's now movement in terms of actually contracting a consultant to provide for the revenues for that in terms of grant funding, seeking out grant funding. And so Canal Place is facilitating this overall potentially up to $15 million project, but is not actually on the hook in the sense of trying to get all of that money itself or trying to do all the work itself. It's also working in partnership with the city of Cumberland and Allegheny County on that. And then in terms of the management plan for the certified heritage area, they're planning on updating that. They're working on also expanding the heritage area slightly. And just one note too, that they've also, there's a recent change in terms of the Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area has recently been certified at the national level. And therefore, Canal Place will then also be able to ask for funding from them. And then there's also questions potentially about, are there any conflict of interest or just kind of redundancies there in terms of the activities of the two entities at the state and then at the federal levels. And the final issue there concerns resolution of funding for audits. There were some concerns about audits not being completed on time for fiscal 2018 through 2020, but then that is there's largely been resolved, and the fiscal 21 audit will be completed hopefully by July 22 at the latest. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
All right, thank you, Andrew, for the great analysis. Are there any questions for our analyst? Raise your hand or just speak up. I don't see any, so thank you very much, Andrew. We are joined by Ms. Dee Ritchie, the Executive Director of Canal Place. Ms. Ritchie, welcome. I think you're on mute there, Madam Executive Director.
Dee. I'm Janice Keene, and I'm the volunteer chair of the Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority. And Dee Dee, as you just mentioned, is our executive director of the authority. And we'd like to thank you for having us here today. And we also want to thank Andrew for his assistance in guiding us through this year's budget analysis. I think the main thing for us to do today, because I know time is of the essence for you, is for Dee Dee to address the two questions that had been identified by Andrew.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. I'm first going to address the consideration for Canal Place to be absorbed into the Maryland State Park System. The Task Force Commission, we haven't had a meeting since August of 2019. So I had met with Senator Edwards. Janice and I both did kind of talk about the frustration of that commission. And in talking with George, he informed us that he was on the State Park Investment Commission. And he recommended that I write a letter to Secretary Hadaway about Canal Place becoming a state park because of so many similarities with the state park system now. The fact that the state park system is now looking for more lands to become state parks, especially waterfront lands, which we have with the river park. I think we're kind of ahead of the game too, as far as looking for historical parks and parks with trail connections. and parks that are tied in with the National Park Service, which we are tied in with the C&O Canal National Historic Park. It just makes sense to us at Canal Place with the way Canal Place is run right now, and with the investments the state has with the historic railway station, the Footer Dye Works building, the shops, things like that, that it's already set up to be like a state park. And we think it would be a great candidate to become a state park. Secondly, I'm supposed to talk about the sustainability of our revenue sources for 22 and 23, and we are actually doing a great job with our revenue at this time. The Western Maryland Scenic Railroad has returned to the railway station. They've taken over the entire second floor, and we've come up with a rate that's it's good revenue for Canal Place budget. The shops at Canal Place are all full, so we're getting tenant money from the shops. The grounds use, it's not as popular as it used to be, but it's coming back, so we're making some money off of that. But the big thing too is, of course, the Maryland Heritage Area money that we get for operations. That's $100,000 every year. We're also seeing an increase. In fact, it was $90,000 this year from the Fairfield Inn and Suites from their room sales, because that lease now gets us 3% of the room sales of the Fairfield. We're getting revenue from Footer Dye Works that increases every year. And once we get we get revenue from parking, but once we get our parking gate system up and running again, we'll also be making revenue from that. So we're doing really well, sustaining ourselves with operations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for the agency? Any questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Madam Executive Director. We're going to stay tuned on this whole notion of becoming a state park versus staying where you are now, or joining DNR. And we may have other questions that come up, so if we do, we'll send them over to you and go from there.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
All right, next we are joined by Metco and our analyst, Emily Haskell. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the analysis of the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, or Metco. I can just share my screen. Metco is a non-budgeted entity that allows the state to own or develop property for economic development purposes. And I'm going to start with Metco's financial statement on page 1. The main takeaway here is that Metco's net operating income in fiscal 2021 continued to be positive at $5.3 million, which was an increase from fiscal 2020, but still below pre-pandemic levels. Also, on the last line, you can see that Metco ended fiscal 2021 with negative net assets at about negative $327 million, driven primarily by yearly income deficits for the Chesapeake Bay Conference Center, or CBCC project. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows Metco's net assets over time. The red line represents net assets of the facilities Metco owns and operates, currently totaling 15 facilities, while the blue line is for non-operating projects, where Metco generally serves as an arm's length financing entity. Operating facilities net assets decreased by $27 million in fiscal 2021, largely due to a decrease of more than $21 million at CBCC. The net asset deficit is not necessarily a concern for projects as long as they continue to have a positive net operating income, as most of Metco's operating projects do. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the operating income by project. Overall, the net operating income for Metco's operating facilities increased in fiscal 2021 to $3.7 million, up from a low of $1 million in fiscal 2020. The increase is driven primarily by the University of Maryland College Park student housing project, while 6 of Metco's projects posted losses in fiscal 2021. You can see the Chesapeake Bay Conference Center posted an $11.4 million loss in fiscal 2021, The project has been classified as non-performing since 2015 and has continued to struggle during the pandemic, first with closures and capacity restrictions, and now with labor shortages in the hospitality industry, as well as fewer large event bookings. The project is able to cover operating expenses, but not full debt service payments, and Metco is working with investors to extend a short-term forbearance agreement that ended at the end of last year. The Baltimore City Garages project went on watch status during the pandemic due to declines in parking customers, and Metco has retained a parking consultant for the project, but expects the recovery to be slow. As for Metco's non-operating projects, a residential building in Baltimore City was classified as non-performing this past August and is in the process of refinancing. In addition, the Purple Line project has been in watch status since August 2020. Lastly, I want to talk about student housing, which accounts for most of Metco's operating facilities. During the pandemic, revenues at student housing projects suffered as schools transitioned to more remote and hybrid learning models. In spring 2020, Metco issued refunds to students living in Metco projects at the request of the institutions, and occupancy in many projects remained low that fall as well. As shown in Exhibit 3 on page 8, housing projects at several schools failed to meet the required debt coverage ratio of 1.2 at the end of fiscal 2020, fiscal 2021, or both, and these projects were placed in watch status. Metco expects that all student housing projects can make their upcoming debt service payments, and all with the exception of UMB and Frostburg will exceed the required debt coverage ratio in fiscal 2022. UMB's recovery has been slower than the projects at the other schools, and Frostburg is expected to have lower occupancy this coming term and has recently been classified as watch. Finally, Metco is a non-budgeted entity and DLS has no recommendations. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Emily, for that analysis. Any questions for the analyst? All right, well, thank you again, Emily. We'll move forward with our new executive director, Mr. Tom Sadowski. And welcome, Tom. Great to see you. Congratulations on the new job. And we know we're going to expect big things out of you, so welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I'm equal to the task. I very much appreciate this opportunity to address all of you. As the chairman had mentioned, I joined Metco as executive director back in August. So I know I've met many of you before on other matters, but I'm pleased and honored to be here in representation of Metco. I'd like to thank Emily Haskell for just a top shelf report. I think she did a great job kind of analyzing a very complex array of projects that we engage in here at Metco. In addition to Emily's report, we've also provided written testimony, which includes excerpts from our annual report that we produce for the legislature each year. And this report summarizes our legislative origin, corporate overview, and it highlights the status of most of our recent projects and economic development initiatives. As you'll note, Metco's portfolio of projects is extremely broad, and it reflects our vast legislative capabilities, which are to assist public and private and nonprofit partners statewide in their efforts. Metco has historically enjoyed sound fiscal management, as Emily had profiled, evidenced by our positive operating income. And just want you to note that this income and this revenue, it supports ongoing operations, programs, and services to our various public and private sector partners. You know, these practices are going to continue. You have my absolute commitment to that. And, you know, I think more so than ever, Maryland needs a strong Metco as we all start to emerge from these challenging pandemic-stricken times. There are tremendous economic challenges and opportunities that remain and that exist to be seized. And in response, Metco has made a conscious effort to be both proactive and strategic, reaching out to both in person and virtually with our state and local partners so that we can better understand the most pressing needs and opportunities that they see emerging in this post-pandemic economy. In doing so, we're reinforcing our commitment to our legislative charge to serve as a solutions provider, utilizing all the capabilities afforded to us by you, the legislature. And we have therefore engaged in a strategic planning effort so that we can best match what we're able to do with those needs and opportunities that we see emerging. That plan should be done in the next few months and be made readily available, but it's really focused on making sure that we are the best services and solution provider that we can be to the private, public, and nonprofit sectors that we're engaged to serve. So right now, what does that mean? So we're engaging in a lot of statewide conversations with regard to infrastructure improvement needs, pursuing opportunities to help forge innovation-driven partnerships and tech commercialization opportunities, mainly among our government, higher education, and private sector partners in industry, helping to facilitate infrastructure improvements at a community level. In a lot of these cases, we're working on tandem with DHCD, but often we're hoping to help these local and municipal governments best leverage federal resources and maybe lighten the burden on their capital budgets, helping them encourage sustainable, inclusive investment and reinvestment in their communities, business growth and retention, and help fuel economic diversification and job creation activity that benefits all. Finally, we don't want to just wait until the call or the email is made, right, or is sent. And we want to help really strategically leverage Maryland's core strengths and assets. Again, by reaching out and being proactive with our partners and sitting down and identifying what those opportunities are and the best path towards securing those opportunities. Some of the examples of that include, how do we best support activity at our federal laboratories and military installations, enhancing regional airport facilities and facilities critical to supply chain solutions, pursuing reshoring opportunities for manufacturing facilities and job creation in the state of Maryland, green energy and sustainable energy projects here in the state, transit-oriented development, and investment in our sustainable communities, looking kind of outside maybe the traditional realm of Metco projects to really get elbow deep in some of these projects with our partners. And again, like I said, not just wait till a bond council calls us or that we have a refinancing opportunity, but really helping to be a solution provider on the front end. The DLS report, this testimony covers a lot of ground. So we're happy to help address any questions you might have. And to help do that, I've asked my good friends and colleagues from Metco, Amy Velich, who's our Director of Bond Financing and Asset Management, and our CFO, Jim Miller, to join me today. So thanks again for your attention and continued support of our efforts as we endeavor to improve the overall economic condition of our state and its residents and the quality of life that we enjoy here in Maryland. So look forward to your questions. Thank you.
I know we do have a few questions. We're joined by Delegate Smith, and Delegate, we did introduce you earlier. We let everyone know you were at ECM covering us, but we do want to say now that you're here, welcome, and we're excited to have you as part of our subcommittee. Delegate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And also I want to say a hearty congratulations to Mr. Sadowski. You're still warming up the seat over there. So best of luck to you as you do the work. So I had just two quick project-based questions. Perhaps your staff might be able to aid you. In the briefing that was prepared, I saw that in my district, the 929 Wolf Street conduit project, that it looked like you were pursuing some refinancing options that would hopefully be finalized by the end of the month. And since we're kind of close to the end of the month, I thought I would at least inquire about the status of that refinancing.
Yes, we're working hard on that, and we hope to complete it very soon. Amy, I'll defer to you if you want to provide any more detail.
Sure. We are currently still working on that project. The closing day is likely going to be pushed from the 27th to the 31st of this month, but actively all parties are trying to get that completed. And if that project were to be refinanced, it would move off of our watch list, as it would be kind of right sized to be a performing project.
Okay, perfect. That's good news. And then lastly, we know that Baltimore Garages, you had consulted with, I think, a parking consultant. I didn't know if those recommendations were received yet from the consultant.
Yes, the recommendations were received from the consultant. We've also shared those with the city as well as our parking manager, and they're working on addressing the various comments and recommendations by the consultant. And so I think the return on the garages has been slow, and has been slowed again by Omicron with less transient business. But we're taking a look through everything and trying to respond to the recommendations as appropriate and follow through with what they've asked us to complete.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I didn't tell you this, but I'm going to ask everybody this. So I don't want everyone to be like, okay, I'm new to appropriations. I just wanted to know, does Metco have an equity lens that it utilizes for its work program?
Yes, and we have strict MBE requirements that we adhere to, and it's contained in our report. Some of the vendors and contractors and subcontractors that we've engaged with over the years. So yes, thank you for that question.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Delegate. Vice Chair Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will echo your comments. Really excited to have Delegate Smith join us, partners in the alphabet, and excited to be partners on appropriations. And Mr. Sadowski, congratulations on your new role as well. I'm glad to have you here. Two questions for you. The first, so I know today the Board of Public Works officially approved the new contract on the Purple Line. Just curious, everything squared away with the previous bonds being repaid when the previous contractor left, and what's the process for issuing new ones with the new contractor on board?
Yeah, things are proceeding with that. Amy, do you want to provide any additional detail on that?
Yes, so the bonds were defeased in November of last year. However, we did keep it on our project classification report as a watch since it was during the last fiscal year. We are actively working with the Maryland Department of Transportation and the other partners in the project to have a new issuance for that project, hopefully sometime in this fiscal year.
And then, Mr. Sadowski, just sort of a broader question. I mean, I think there was a lot of frustration on the part of many of us over the housing situation last year, and I'm glad that I think we've gotten to a pretty amenable conclusion on it. But just sort of curious overall, I mean, I think it exposed some concerns with the process that students often feel like they're engaged in a part of the university system or individual campuses, only to discover sort of when something goes wrong that it's really a separate entity. And so I'm just kind of curious. I know there's a new facility that's going to come online shortly at Morgan State. Any takeaways or changes in the operational procedure from your end or with the university system or the individual schools on sort of how these are going to be marketed to students, or even in the change of I don't want to say the formal change management, but sort of maybe more of a partnership on them with the schools as opposed to being completely separate entities?
Well, and I'll defer to Amy a bit on this too, but one of the things that we did, Delegate, is we've made it really clear who they're engaging with, what the business relationship is, where to go with concerns, what the expectations are, and who to contact if there are any questions in that regard. So I think Amy and company made those changes some time ago to make sure that the past spring semester, this past fall semester, that it was even more clear, kind of like a truth in leasing kind of a statement where students knew what was happening, who they were actually engaging with in terms of Metco versus the system, and where to go with questions and concerns in that regard. So we took great pains in clarifying the documents, as albeit before my time, but everything that I've seen and that we've reviewed since has made sure that there's absolute clarity. And we've even had conversations with some of your colleagues about how to make that more uniform in all the declarations to students before they engage in any kind of housing commitments. Amy, I don't know if there's anything in addition you want to offer.
Nope, that covered it really well, mirroring what Tom said. We talk with our university partners quite frequently, and we've made adjustments to the lease agreements and informed the university of our plans to make those adjustments that really emphasize that Metco is the party that they're entering into with the lease agreement, and providing information on who they should be contacting at the management company if they have any questions. But the universities have all been really receptive of the proposed language that we provided for the upcoming leases this next fiscal year.
If you get a chance, Amy, I would really, I'd love to see it as well. If you could send that over. Thank you, Mr. Sadowski. Congrats again on the new role. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Sadowski. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and congratulations on your new job. Following up on Delegate Solomon's questions about the housing, the student housing, in the Joint Chairman's report, you said Metco has not pursued collections for students who did not qualify for relief. I just want to confirm that you're never going to pursue that it's not going to be turned over to someone else who might pursue that debt.
It was like my second day in the job, August 17th, we sat around the table and for like an hour, and I'm like, wait, we are not pursuing collections. We are not pursuing, we're not sending students or families to collections agencies as it related to that, to the COVID experience that, was so unfortunate and unprecedented. So I can confirm that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that bit of fairness in a time when a lot of things didn't seem fair.
Well, and look, I had my two oldest sons just graduated from college this past December, and I know what that anxiety is like. So no, I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
I'll echo our thank you.
I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. This is something the subcommittee worked a long time on over the last year and a half. And so we appreciate what you've done there, and hope to continue that kind of working relationship. Off to a great start.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. No doubt.
Any other questions for Mr. Sadowski from the subcommittee? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just a quick comment on the Hyatt, all of our favorite hotel and golf course resort. I know we have respective constituencies we have to be, pay homage to, but the Hyatt's actually performing pretty well of late. And I know that the numbers look kind of grim. At its peak revenue production, we were about 45 million. Anticipated revenues at the end of this calendar year, we're projecting 39 million. So we've seen an incredible amount of transient business. People that don't want to get on an airplane, they'd rather get in a car, take their families, go someplace nice, and enjoy that stay. We've seen a lot of golf activity at the resort. So a lot of transient business is what they're calling it. The group activity was really hurt by the pandemic. We started to see that come back. Any of you that attended the most recent Metco conference, I think that still went on as scheduled at the Cambridge Hyatt. So we're really proud of the management team and the work that they've done there, maintaining employment levels, dealing with some really significant supply chain challenges. But we just committed to a grant to make improvements to the golf facilities there, to add a golf simulator, so that we hope to use that to encourage more group activity, particularly during the winter months when we really see a downturn in activity. So I really didn't want to miss the opportunity, albeit still challenged. The management team is really busting their butts out there to do a good job, keep people employed, and do the best they can for not just the community, but the resort and the entire state. So keep your fingers crossed with us. And when you get a chance, just go down and visit. And
No, it's great to hear. It's a great asset for our state. So we want it to succeed, as with all your projects. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
All right. Finally, today we have the Maryland State Library Agency, and the analyst Laura Hyde has joined us. Laura, welcome.
Thank you. Can I have my screen sharing? It says it's disabled. Thank you. Okay, again, I'm Laura Hyde, and this is a budget presentation for the Maryland State Library Agency. In fiscal 23, the budget decreases by $2.0 million, or 2% to $95.5 million. If you'll please turn to page 4, which is the overview of agency spending. You can see that public library aid receives $49.2 million, or 51%. The State Library Resource Center receives $20.5 million, or 22%. Aid for local library employee fringe benefits receives $20.8 million, or 22%. Personnel receives $3.1 million, or 3%, and operating expenses are 1.9, or 2%. The state added approximately 131,000 additional residents in the 2020 census, and this is reflected in the fiscal 23 funding formulas for the public library aid and for the State Library Resource Center. The public library aid program also includes a $17.10 per capita formula funding as mandated in Chapter 27, and $3 million is mandated in Chapter 17.1 million. 2016 for extended hours at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, and $2.5 million annual federal grant from aid to local libraries. And the State Library Resource Center receives a per capita increase in fiscal 23 of 4 cents from 185 to 189 as mandated in Chapter 27. you'll please turn to page 5, Exhibit 2, showing the proposed budget. So as you can see here, the public library aid increases approximately $2 million in general funds, or 5%, and this is due to increases in per capita and the state population. The State Library Resource Center formula funding increases by approximately $775,000, or 4%. This is also due to increases in per capita and state population. The aid for local library employee fringe benefits increases by $283,000, or 1%. This reflects declining contribution rates and expected low rates of growth for this program in fiscal 23 and beyond. And then there are increases for the library for the blind and print disabled of approximately $106,000 for property services and capital project contracts. There's also a move from in the budget of one-time PAYGO funds for capital improvements from the fiscal 22 operating budget to the capital budget in fiscal 23, and then one-time American Rescue Plan funds for COVID-19 that also were expended in fiscal 22, $2.9 million. If you please tune to page 6 for personnel. The library agency has a fiscal 23 allowance of 31 positions, which is not a change from fiscal 22. And they currently have 2 positions vacant, which is about 6% of its total complement. You'll please turn to Exhibit 3 on page 7. This is the library's federal grant distribution. As you can see, this is the $2.6 million I spoke of previously. MSLA received $2.9 million in our funds in fiscal 22, and this shows $2.6 million of these grants. These were used for mobile units, infrastructure improvements, and broadband grants. The mobile unit grants help local library systems provide reliable internet access to rural and underserved communities. The infrastructure grants provide communities with additional resources for continuity of services for during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the broadband grants increase Wi-Fi access to serve local community needs, including hotspots and antennas on library buildings and municipal partner buildings. And it's worth noting that MSLA reported that the request from county libraries for these items totaled approximately $5.2 million. You please turn to Exhibit 4 on page 9, Library Program and Attendance. The library system continues to have, it has a decline in attendance, mostly due to COVID-19. The decrease from fiscal 2021 was approximately 24,000 people, or 24%, and library program attendance was decreased by 636,000, or 24%. You could please turn to Exhibit 5 on page 10. This shows digital materials owned and accessed. And from fiscal 20 to 21, the total number of digital materials owned by Maryland libraries increased by 1.2 million items, and the number of digital materials accessed increased by 4.1 million items, which represents the continuing increase in future years as changes in the publishing industry and book sales shift towards digital materials. If you could please turn to Exhibit 6 on page 11, this is for the Library of the Blind and Print Disabled. You can see that the LBPD was closed during COVID-19, but the library continued to circulate materials and has since opened to serve patrons daily. Reflecting these closures from fiscal 20 to 21, patrons served declined by 351, and materials access also declined by approximately 4,000. But MSLA expects that with increased accessibility to the library in calendar 21 and 22, number of patrons will return to pre-pandemic levels. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and that concludes this presentation. I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you for the great analysis, Laura. Any questions for the analyst? All right, seeing none, we'll turn to our agency. I think we have team here, but I will turn it over to Irene Padilla, who can introduce her team, and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes and members of the committee. I'm Irene Padilla, State Librarian, and with me are Tamar Sarnoff, Director of Public Libraries and the State Networking Branch, John Owen, Director of the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, and Donna Liberto, Chief Financial Officer. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I thank you for your ongoing support of Maryland's libraries. We are here in support of our agency's operating budget, and I want to begin by thanking Laura Hyde for her extremely thorough analysis with which we concur. Thank you, Laura. We have a written testimony, so I won't reiterate all of the state library's accomplishments after being established as an independent agency just 4.5 years ago. I'd like to very briefly highlight the strategic leadership role the agency played in 3 key areas to support the public library's response to the pandemic, because I think this most clearly illustrates what we do and why the Maryland State Library Agency is important. First, because this agency administers state and federal funds for Maryland's libraries, we were able to quickly distribute over $3 million in American Recovery Plan Act funds, actually it was $3.3 million, to provide enhancements to programming, services, and collections across Maryland's libraries to meet changing customer needs in light of COVID-19. Every public library in the state that asked received money from this program. In fact, we had over $10 million in requests for this funding. Funding was provided for 14 mobile units to improve access to the internet to rural and underserved populations that are most in need of this service, including visits from mobile units to Boys and Girls Clubs, daycare centers, senior living centers, and the homebound, as well as rural communities that lack both reliable broadband internet and public transportation. In addition to providing internet access, these vehicles will provide access to print materials, special collections, mobile classes, and free health, employment, and legal services. The funding also includes infrastructure projects not related to internet access to provide upgrades to outdated end-of-life equipment, statewide database collection enhancement, statewide staff training, facilities master planning for 9 counties, and a statewide delivery study. Additionally, funding supported county-wide and statewide equity, diversity, and inclusion projects that allow libraries to reflect on collections and policies and to engage customers and staff in meaningful discussions on the issue. Second, because the agency provides leadership to promote planning and innovation in the development of library programs and services, we coordinated statewide guidance along with expert advice from health officials on the phased reopening of library facilities during COVID-19. And the state's libraries met this challenge by pivoting to new programs in new formats and enhancing their services to communities. While buildings were closed or were only able to provide limited service, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my.
A little technical trouble, but we're getting it.
Oh, thank you.
It's sputtering a little bit, but I think you're doing okay. We're with you.
The afternoon Wi-Fi from my home is not as reliable.
Understood. I have the same problem.
So we also supported countywide and statewide equity, diversity, inclusion projects, which I mentioned, and we are providing leadership to promote planning and innovation in the development of library programs and services, which I mentioned earlier. And if you can just bear with me a minute, I am having a terrible time here.
Sure, go ahead.
The cursor does not want to play my game. Let me move on then. Beyond that, Maryland libraries, when they were able to be open, provided limited access to resources like public computers and public printing, extending free Wi-Fi beyond the walls so residents could connect to the internet from library parking lots via book studios and Wi-Fi hotspots. Library staff continued to engage customers by providing robust virtual programming from story times to conversations on equity and justice. Over 10,000 hours of contact services were provided, including material pickup, printing, and reference service. They held outdoor story times, prepared take-home science and early learning kits, and overall provided 2,000 virtual programs. We have 5,600 computers for public access in our library branches across the state, and libraries increased e-material holdings by 32% to provide remote access to information for all Marylanders. There was a 13% increase in circulation of ebooks and other downloadable materials, and a 31% increase in customer access to digital materials. Although in-person visits to the library buildings were down, as noted in analyst review, libraries did see over 63,000 visits for contact of service, and the use of e-resources just increased dramatically. We answered over almost 5.4 million questions, helping people gain important skills for lifelong learning and career readiness, both virtually and in the branches. Librarians provided virtual one-on-one instruction, resume and job search assistance, and homework help. Even when libraries partially reopened, we continued to provide contact with service, including book pickup and the ability to access print and other services. So overall, we feel that we've had a very good year, that we continue to meet the needs of Maryland. And I'll just say that third, I just want to laud our staff at the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Critically Disabled for continuing to provide service throughout the pandemic. Not one Maryland resident went without materials to review or read during this time, unless they couldn't get delivery from the post office. But I'm not going to go there. That's a whole different story. But we wanted to make sure to do this, unlike some other states that weren't able to carry this off, because we are committed to access for everyone. And at this point, Maryland libraries remain resilient and responsive to the community's needs, and will help ensure that the state is well positioned for a rapid recovery. Libraries supporting vaccine distribution and provision of health information throughout this time. And we are extremely grateful for your support of the Maryland State Library Agency and its mission. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you for all the work that you've done and your team. It's exciting to hear of all the wraparound services that libraries and librarians are providing. We know that these are community hubs, really, is what they are, and providing real access and resources for the community. When I was a kid, second, third grade, we didn't have money for childcare. So I walked across the street, went to the library. The librarian would show me books. There's about 5 or 6 of us, put on videos for us, and it was great. And we know that's what you all do for so many in our community. So we're happy that you're back open and providing these services on behalf of the entire subcommittee. Are there any questions for our state librarian? Okay, we all love you. No questions.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that subcommittee, that concludes our hearing for today. We will continue tomorrow, I think, with our state higher ed overview at 1 o'clock. See you all then.